Numerous reports indicate that manufacturing has emerged as the favorite target of ransomware groups and hackers. In response, a new report from Industrial Media discusses the evolution of industrial cybersecurity, its current state, and the tactics hackers are using, including phishing schemes, malware, and ransomware attacks. It also details solutions in arming manufacturers with the knowledge and resources needed to win more fights on this highly complex and ultra-competitive battlefield. Download the industrial sector's new battlefield by going to manufacturing.net/cyber. Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. One of the most common topics we explore here on Security Breach is the ongoing challenge surrounding asset visibility in the OT landscape. At times, it's frustrating because it would seem that the solution starts with basic inventory management approaches because the first step in developing frameworks or plans that range from tool selection to attack response is knowing what you have to protect. Of course, it's never that simple due to the increasing amount of Internet of Things technology and the connection demands they place on the industrial environment. And it's a situation that promises to only get more complex, with Fortinet reporting that in 2023, only 5% of surveyed organizations have 100% visibility into their own OT activities. And as bad as that is, it's actually down from 13% in 2022. We're obviously going in the wrong direction, but here to provide some insight on managing this growing number of machines, connection points, access points, and other vulnerable areas of the ICS is Kevin Bocek. He's the Chief Innovation Officer at Venafi, a leading provider of asset identity management. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us today and welcome to Security Breach. Going to come in a little bit hot here with a question for you. One of the things we're going to be talking a lot about here is asset management and visibility, and it's becoming a bigger challenge on the plant floor with all these sort of IoT-based assets coming to fruition and being realized to help gain all these efficiencies that we want in the manufacturing setting. But as we're bringing in all this technology, we're adding connections, we're adding machinery, we've got a lot of legacy equipment that we're trying to implement this to. One of the simple solutions, it would seem to be, is maybe we just need fewer connection points. Are we over-connected at some point? And maybe we can start off with some of your thoughts there.
Wow. Well, I can't imagine the business would say that we're over-connected because I think they want more intelligence in terms of production and planning, inventory, delivery. So I would say the business would say no. And I think there are two vectors there too to think about over-connected, at least as I've thought about it. There's one in the sense of network connections. So data in, out, across plants, across the floor. But there's also two, the density of compute. Because when it comes to capability, when you think about connection, it's also too like, what are those systems on the floor actually doing, or what are they capable of doing? I mean, typical OT systems may not have AI embedded, but if we think about what's being planned for, in some cases, what's already delivered, is really dense compute and high capability that we may not have seen before. So I think there are two vectors there when it comes to connectiveness. It's the network, but it's also the capability. And I think the first principle go forward is, wow, we're going to get more compute, more connectivity coming in. So that's what we have to plan for. And that's what we have to think. I think as you've shared up in the upfront, both how do we secure that and keep it available.
So we love all this digital transformation, all this IoT technology. We love the connectedness and all the data that we can get flowing to help us make better decisions and run the production floor more efficiently. But why are we struggling so much, in your opinion, to implement security while we're bringing in all these new connection points and all this new technology? It doesn't seem to be getting the type of attention or priority that it really deserves.
I think there are two reasons, which of course, I mean, the audience here, I think will understand it. They live it. One is obviously there's the technology. Some of the technology that has been deployed in the past, may not even have the idea of identity, for example, built in. May have been pre even password era. And so a lot of the controls that we might have had, even in IoT worlds, obviously even in the digital world outside, just aren't relevant. And so we're catching up. I think that is one area. But second, though, of course, is who's responsible for both designing, architecting, delivering, and operating. And oftentimes those are very different personas, um, possibly different than the way we've thought in traditional digital infrastructure that might be part of the front office. And I think so that's something that has a lot of catching up to do. I am seeing great trends there. I'm seeing more and more, for example, the chief security officer becoming a lot more interested in securing the plant, the physical systems now that are becoming digital and bringing along architects and specialists. So I think they're great trends, but I think much of it has been down to, and I think the audience would definitely understand it's people, and different people have been responsible for design, deploy, maintain, update, operate.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting paradigm shift that we're experiencing right now, and I think you're absolutely right. Those who are enjoying this podcast right now, that has shifted dramatically, probably in the last 5 years or so. In your opinion, what does that team ideally look like? We've had the siloing of the IT and OT. They don't always like working together. We've talked a lot about that. We want the C-level buy-in, but we also need those individuals who are charged with really executing all of this technology that has more of these connection points also playing a role. Is it just getting all these folks in the same room, or what should these teams look like?
Well, to me, it's going to have to follow the pattern that we've seen occur again in the front office with digital transformation, which is more and more we see the teams that operate and design coming together. That idea of DevOps, we've seen the emergence of platform teams that really engineer for operations and that also then embed security. I think that's one of the things we're catching up, certainly when it comes to security. Uh, I think the good news there is where it comes from the business down. Cyber is a top now risk being built in at the highest level. And I think that's going to take time then bring teams together and then have the expertise that's available. And then, of course, too, as this audience would know, then have budget be available to add the security controls that, yeah, we've taken for granted a lot in the front office.
You mentioned budgeting. We want to get that C-suite on board for all this, so that make sure those resources are available. Are there certain tactics or certain approaches that you've seen being more effective for helping, it's kind of a cheesy term, but like the cybersecurity champions really sort of get the ear of those folks who control the purse strings?
Yeah, I suspect that, again, the audience is pretty well adept as they've done before, which is you got to bring the executives and the leaders on down to see actually what is happening, what's at risk from a cyber perspective. They used to be in the old days, yeah, you'd bring executives down to the data center and they could see, there are systems and there's this where customer data comes in and it's processed and they could have some physical sense. Now, obviously, that's no longer the case, but I think, yeah, it's from a cyber perspective, bringing executives down and talking through this is the impact. This is what could happen. This is what we see as the risk to really get that across. And then I think that's the way you drive budget. Ultimately, it's bringing a little bit of, I think, again, probably the audience has been used to that in other ways about driving budget, maybe from an operational perspective or from a business intelligence perspective. But yeah, I think from a cyber perspective, this is what we're going to have to do.
And I think that's interesting because it's a great point. When we look at capital expenditures, we can see pieces of equipment. We can see certain elements of an industrial control system. We understand software because we can see it on our screens every day. But when we talk about risk, it's sort of just this looming element there that we just don't want to talk about. And we're balancing risk between we don't want to get shut down, we don't want to get ransomed, but we also don't want to get left behind. Could you talk a little bit about this convergence of risk? And it means different things at different levels. But again, how can we get folks to really appreciate what it means and what they do every day?
Well, I wanted to say, I think there's one good thing that's, although certainly I know many teams were challenged, that's occurred recently. Many of the audience would have been impacted from the CrowdStrike outage. It's a perfect example, I think, to demonstrate cyber risk to executives, to the board, and drive funding, drive the understanding of what can happen. Because there you had, that was thankfully just a software update that went awry. But it could have been, though, of course, much worse. It could have been a malicious software update. We've seen that. Of course, I think Stuxnet is the prototype of that. And so what I would say is that's a perfect opportunity now to take that as a demonstration. Aha, this is what can happen. We've seen it happen. And thankfully, it wasn't a cyber attack. And I think then when it comes to risk, well, I think the audience has probably done a pretty good job. There's over the years, and I think now we just have to take that now and bring it to cyber because there's an operational risk to availability. There's an operational risk. Excuse me. There's the risk to integrity of our systems. And then, of course, the protection of the proprietary data that's being generated on the floor and then being sent back up for analytics and planning and supply chain. So, of course, many of the audience will know that's that CIA triad of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I think that really well describes, and again, I think you can describe that to an executive about what then risk means down at the manufacturing floor, the plant floor, in ways then that they can get. Because yeah, the confidentiality of all of that data that's being generated now and being sent, being trained for supply chain, machine learning for supply chain analysis, that is highly sensitive. That is something that, in many ways, from the product itself that's being manufactured, may have in many ways the same value. And of course, to availability, well, perfect. We saw the example of what can happen. And then, of course, integrity can have an impact on either one of them. Any of our systems then that are manipulated then has the opportunity for, to bring systems down or to breach that confidentiality.
No, it's a great parallel between CrowdStrike and Stuxnet. We've got plenty of folks out there in the critical infrastructure side of things that Stuxnet still creates shivers up and down everybody's spine a little bit in terms of what that spawned.
Well, we see that happening. Of course, we see it often times with software updates that have been maliciously created, or software update systems that are taken over, endpoint systems, laptop systems. And yes, so I think that's the thing too. We talked about more and more connections. That's certain. That's a certainty. So I think, that's a great way to demonstrate. And of course, too, very timely now for the audience, although I imagine this is going to be replayed a few weeks later. We've seen recently what appears to be supply chain attacks, certainly in the Middle East, that may have been combined with cyber attacks. So I think Stuxnet is the prototype. We've seen what can happen with CrowdStrike, and I think that CIA triad gives us a really great way just to communicate that to executives and then executives on up to the board.
Absolutely. Well, you talked about stuff going on in the Middle East. That's when we get into state actor sort of things and those hackers that are going on out there. What type of activities are you seeing right now? Has there been a spike? Are we seeing more state-sponsored type stuff? Is it supply chain focused? What types of trends are you seeing in terms of either attacks or vulnerabilities or groups that are kind of raising havoc right now?
Yeah, definitely what we see as a trend over, I would say, especially since COVID times, is that the adversaries, and of all types, nation state, through to those are motivated either by profit or by intent, definitely attacking more and more the software development lifecycle, the software supply chain, which then can have a very much a kinetic effect, again, as we saw with CrowdStrike, because I'm sure many then physical systems then were offline. So We have been seeing that. We're seeing adversaries look to try and tamper with software. For example, insert vulnerabilities in open source software that you might think has no impact on a plant floor, but absolutely does because either it gets built into software you use or you're using it directly. Uh, we've seen the adversary again try and steal, for example, the way that you uh, authenticate code that then gets installed, because again, all of these systems are machines and they know no difference between a good software update and a bad software update, a malicious one. So we see the adversary trying to steal the code signing certificates that are used to authenticate software that's updated on systems. And it's at all levels. It's at the nation state level, and it's also those motivated by ransom, by profit.
Yeah, the software stuff is really scary, and it's kind of a combination between very complex tactics, but also very basic types of things that the hackers are still doing because it works. So why would they stop? When it comes to the software stuff specifically, what have you seen as maybe some of the best approaches or strategies to defend against those types of attacks, whether it be a tooling, whether it be training, whether it be just looking for certain types of tactics that the hackers are using?
Yep. So, and it goes back to a basic principle, which is we, especially now, we look to identify every human that interacts with our digital systems. We want to give every one on the shop floor, every customer, every business partner an identity. And we have to do the same thing then with software too, that's coming into our environments. It's something we're all very used to. So all of our mobile devices, whenever you get a software update, it comes digitally signed that tells us who developed it and has it been modified. That is a basic control that's built into Windows. It's built into a lot of the physical plant control systems. We may not be using it though. And also too, our teams may be developing software in your organizations, then that gets installed. And the real question is all of that digitally signed? Does it come with code signing? Because that is a way, it's an easy way to say this code is good, this code is bad. So to stop unauthorized code. It's especially if you look into critical systems like, for example, airplanes now. So we'll get out of the manufacturing, the shop floor, but the new airplane, the new generations, the 737 MAX, the A350, A380, 787, all of these are what were called E-enabled aircraft. And they're just big flying data centers, basically. And they have software installed, and every piece of software on these new aircraft come digitally signed, come with code signing because we can authenticate the source of the code. We can say it hasn't been modified. So that is a really simple control, widely used. I think if we use that more, we can stop the adversary from getting malicious code of all types, whether that's for ransom or to try and, bring our systems offline.
Yeah, it's just another step, right? It's another thing we just have to do. And in the manufacturing side of things, it's tough to slow down for a second and take that extra step because we do need to keep going. And it's just sort of ingrained in our mindset, but becoming more and more important to do.
We've got to bring these controls. Otherwise, again, it just leaves a really open target for the bad guys to abuse.
Absolutely. So, Kevin, talk to us a little bit about Venafi and some of the stuff that you guys are up to and doing to help support industrial cybersecurity.
Yeah, well, at Venafi, what we've recognized along with our customers is that, out there in the world, even on the shop floor, there are two actors. There are humans and there are machines. And I think the audience would know that very well. You can look probably out and maybe see them both working together. And both must be identified. So the humans must be identified, whether they're your customers, your business partners, the workforce, just the same machines. And machines might be something that is a physical system, but it also might be in that physical system. I talked about that density of compute. You may have many different applications running, containers running. I think those of the technologists in the audience, especially, there's a lot of focus now on bringing Kubernetes down into the manufacturing floor because of the agility that it brings to run different software, high density compute. So all of those are machines and they must have identity. That's what we've worked on with our customers. So all software from the time it gets from a developer that it comes with an identity. It comes code signed, for example. When we put that code into operation, that we can say, yes, that's the code that we said was going to run. It hasn't been modified. And that as it's working, as it's communicating over a network, can we say that, yep, it's being properly authenticated from one machine to another? Authorization is happening. And when it gets into manufacturing systems, the shop floor, again, that's becoming more and more important. It used to be just you might have some type of controller device that would talk to another piece of network equipment. But now, of course, you've got controller devices, and even in some cases, some um, direct controlling systems that are even talking out over the network, possibly out to the cloud. So making sure that all of those have unique identities, we get authentication authorization done right. And that's what we've been helping to solve, machine identity security for our customers.
The other part of this, and you mentioned this a couple times, and it comes in at different levels in the industrial sector, but we talk about secure by design a lot. And it's hitting home on two fronts. First of all, we've got our manufacturing audience who is saying, when I invest in this newest automation platform, I hook it up to some of my legacy equipment, I've been able to depend on that supplier to make sure I'm good from a security perspective, but we're sort of forgetting about the legacy element there. The other part of it then is when they produce those products, like you referenced there, and making sure they're passing along some security benefits as well. What's been your experience in working with folks to address that on sort of both of those fronts?
Well, there's a really pressing issue that's come up that I think gives a perfect example. And that, of course, is the risks that are going to be coming with quantum computing. Now, for some of the audience that will say, like, oh, quantum computing? Like, I don't think quantum computers are a risk in our shop floor. But for those of you that are manufacturing and delivering connected devices that are going to be living out in the world for 5, 10, 20, 30 years, that is a real risk. And it's something that's has many product as well as manufacturing customers. It is top of mind with them right now because full expectation is that in the next 5 years or so, that what we've been using in the past to be able to, again, to authenticate devices that are out there connected in the world will completely fail. So that's where secure by design comes in, and that it has to be part of, from the concept all the way through to manufacturing. And that, I think, has really woken up a lot of our customers to that understanding. Now, that's in the products that are being delivered, of course, to customers. I think at the plant, at the manufacturing systems, that's, you said it. It's there is a legacy challenge. We've got a lot of systems that were not designed to be secure in a connected world. I think the good news there, though, is that, and probably the audience knows, is there are more and more, I think, experts, more and more providers of systems that are able to secure them. For example, I've seen recently there are startups, for example, that are able to bring authentication for systems that had no authentication controls built in, to bring multi-factor authentication to systems where there are no authentication before. So I think that's great news. Now, again, was that secure by design? No, but that's where we can retrofit. And I think, yeah, so that's, oftentimes in cyber doesn't sound like good news. I think that's good news. We're headed in the right direction.
It is. It's just breaking like I said before, a lot of these paradigms where, well, it was just always so easy. Well, we have to take this extra step. We have to embrace the fact that we need to take this extra step with the technologies that we're working with and how vulnerable they can be because of all those efficiencies we gain through the increased number of connections.
Right.
So
right. I think, again, the only way that you really get that on the radar of executives, both the business line executives and also the cyber executives is bringing them down to
Yeah.
the plant floor and seeing systems at work and understanding what connects to another system and how that could impact, dramatically the business.
Absolutely. Well said. So, looking at this from a 50,000 foot perspective, and generally speaking, when it comes to secure by design, are the approaches here, when we look at these products and putting in that secure by design dynamic, can it be a sort of blanket approach? Does it need to be highly customized? Do we need to get government involved in setting certain regulatory actions in place surrounding that? What's your take there?
So I think there is certainly the expectation that there's going to be more and more accountability, whether that's in the US and Europe from a regulatory framework, more and more accountability for secure by design. So I think from the audience should start to expect more, certainly from their vendors, and I think also then government is going to start to bring that forward. So as a principle planning out, expect more towards the future from your vendors. Now that's not going to help today, and I think there isn't. I don't believe there is a one size fits all approach. You know the systems, you know your risks and your individual, businesses in your environments. And I think then you just have to describe that. The risks will be different from one plant to another plant. I could imagine in petrochemical, it's very different. The risks, say, for example, in manufacturing, surgical robots, for example. So yeah, I don't think it's one size fits all. I think that's the good thing. That's why we're here to be able to describe that risk, to understand the systems. Um, that's the good news, I think, is that we've got a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. Another thing that's been sort of a reoccurring theme in our conversation here is the human element, the human dynamic that's always going to come into a play here. Whether we're talking about new tools, training, understanding of the situation in whole, or getting buy-in from those in the executive level. What have you seen in terms of improving that employee understanding, that worker understanding of how important cybersecurity is? Because we can have briefings and training all day long, but if it becomes a check a box type of thing and I don't have to be on the plant floor for a couple hours and I get a break, that's not doing it. That's not really meeting the goal or the expectation. What have been some maybe approaches or strategies that you've seen that have been more effective in getting that buy-in?
Yeah, I think it's usually the untraditional type of training, and I think that's where training is getting better. So it is as I've seen it recently, it is improving. It used to be not that great. Yeah, definitely a snooze. I think as much then as we can as professionals. I mean, hey, um, uh, as consumers individually, we know a lot about technology, and we also, I think, are becoming much more aware. So I think for everyone that's working in a plant manufacturing environment, it's, bringing what we know about safety in the mobile world, safety even in the social media world. It's like a lot of those same things apply then when you go to work. And I think, yeah, making that interesting. Again, I don't think there is anything magical about it. But the other thing I would say, though, is that when we do have incidents, making them then a learning experience too. So when we have either an outage or a cyber incident, hey, let's make that a learning incident, a learning opportunity for everyone in the business. And that's where you can actually learn from like real world events. So uh, again, never, I think definitely, probably much of the audience would say, never let an outage, go unwasted. Uh, and yeah, use that if there is one, even if it's not a cyber event, you can make that an opportunity. Again, that takes some planning ahead of time. Yeah, you wouldn't want to. Again, I know you don't want those to happen, but they do. So yeah, when they do, take the opportunity.
Absolutely. And I appreciate what you're saying there and agree 100% in terms of making it a learning deal as opposed to a punitive situation where you're
Right.
pointing a finger and blaming somebody. Absolutely. Use that as a way for that peer-to-peer education a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing the audience, again, has done. I mean, wow, if you look again, the improvements in efficiencies in at the plant and at the manufacturing environments. I mean, let's take the same perspective on cyber and bringing the same type of thought thinking, which is that is about learning and improvement, not punitive, not punishment for making mistakes.
Absolutely. So my traditional wrap-up question here, Kevin, really appreciate all the great insights so far. What should we be aware of coming down the road here a little bit? What are some of the bigger trends that you see impacting industrial cybersecurity going forward?
I think when we get right back up at the top, which is only expect more connectivity, more density of compute, because the interest in using machine learning, artificial intelligence to improve productivity, to improve supply chain performance, to deal with resilience, like whether I think again the business has learned a lot with COVID, has learned a lot with supply chain challenges, especially in Europe as we saw war break out. Uh, so that's coming, and probably many have already seen it. I see it especially when I see a lot of the demos now being conducted around AI and machine learning. They're not just chatbots. It's about actually making intelligent decisions about supply chain. So expect only more connectivity, more density of compute coming down.
Yeah. More opportunities to
Yeah.
make sure all those connections are then secure as well.
More risk. I mean, it definitely is more risk that will come from it, and that's our jobs to make sure that we're going to stay safe and protected, and making sure again that that risk gets conveyed before those systems are, in planning, and then before they go into production, definitely.
Thanks, Kevin. And for more information on the work he and his colleagues are doing, you can check them out at Venafi.com. Also, like to thank you for joining us today, and to catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or MBTmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@IEN.com. For Kevin Bocek, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.